We're on. We're ready.
All right, well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm calling this meeting to order. I'm Douglas Kellner, co-chair. Next to me is Peter Kosinski, co-chair. And we're joined by Commissioner Spano. And unfortunately, Commissioner Peterson was not able to attend in person, but is participating online with us today. Our first item of business is the approval of the minutes from our last meeting of April 29th. Is there a motion?
I'll second.
All right, those in favor of approving the minutes, say aye.
Aye.
And did we hear Commissioner?
Yeah, he said aye.
Okay, good. Okay. All right, now the next item on the agenda ordinarily would be unit updates, but since we have a lot of guests today who have asked to address the commissioners, we've agreed that we would hear them first. So is there anyone who would like to speak first? Professor Appel? Yeah, so why don't you introduce yourself?
I'm Andrew Appel, professor of computer science at Princeton University. I study computer security, software verification, and for the last 15 years I've studied voting machines and voting systems as well. And I thank the Board of Elections for the opportunity to address you. I know your time is valuable, so I will be brief. I want to speak about and advise against the adoption of touchscreen ballot marking devices, except for voters who cannot mark a ballot by hand. All computerized voting machines can be hacked. There's no way to make a completely hack-proof voting machine. We can ask the vendors to make them as hack-resistant as possible, and we can try and test them for hack resistance, but we can't make them hack-proof, and we can't demand that of the vendors. If a paperless touchscreen voting machine is hacked and it lies about the vote counts, there's no recourse and no way to detect that. So New York State very wisely avoided the adoption of paperless touchscreen voting machines when many other states rushed into that 20 years ago. And the machines New York State uses now, which are optical scanners, although they can be hacked too, you still have in the ballot box the paper ballots that the voters mark themselves, and a human recount by people who are harder to hack will get the right count of the votes that the voters actually indicated. Now, there are some touchscreen ballot marking devices on the market, and all of them have the following problem. Although they show a paper ballot that the voter can review, and in principle the voter could detect if the hacked machine is printing a different vote on the paper ballot than they indicated on the screen, a study in Tennessee has shown, with real voters in a real polling place, that the vast majority of the voters do not review their paper ballots very carefully. Most voters don't even look at it at all. And if most of the voters are not reviewing their paper ballot, then they will not be able to detect if a hacked voting machine is printing a different vote on the paper ballot than the one they indicated. Furthermore, even if, suppose the machine is, cheating on 10% of the ballots to try and shift an election by about 10%, and 10% of the voters are alert enough to actually look, and 5% of those voters look down at the race for county commissioner, then something like 1 in 200 voters will notice that the machine is printing a different vote on the paper than they indicated on the touchscreen. And that voter can raise her hand, and what's the poll worker to do? Well, presumably the Board of Elections gives instructions to that poll worker to say, well, maybe you made a mistake, maybe the machine is not working, we'll void that ballot and you get another chance. So for that alert voter, the machine has not stolen her vote. But the hacked machine can steal the votes of all the other voters who are not paying attention. And you might think, well, if a few voters, if the machine is consistently printing fraudulent votes on the paper, then people will notice and you'll detect that the machine is hacked. If you do the math, that means only 3 or 4 voters in the course of a day will raise their hand and say that the machine did something wrong. And that itself is not evidence that the machine is hacked, because we don't know what the voter indicated on the touchscreen, and to preserve the secret ballot, we must not know what the voter indicated on the touchscreen. So even though some voters can know for themselves that the machine misprinted their ballot, the election administrators, the poll workers in the polling place cannot know that. You can't invalidate a whole election just because a few voters raised their hand and said the machine mismarked my vote. That would be inappropriate. If you were to invalidate elections on that basis, then people could cheat the other way and make false claims that the machine invalidated their vote. So this is an essential problem with ballot marking devices. And we don't have this problem with the use of a pen to fill in an oval. The vote that the voter indicates on the paper is the vote they indicate on the paper. There's no computer manipulating how it's presented on the paper for use in a recount. So that's the main thing I want to say. I'll briefly add one or two other things. The hybrid machines that pass the paper ballot under a print head into the ballot box after the last time the voter gets to see what's on the paper are even more dangerous. I really advise against the adoption of those machines, as such a voting machine can leave a few races unvoted, especially where the voter really did do an undervote, leave a blank space, and then fill it in later with a fraudulent vote. So really you should not adopt those machines. And finally, what's printed on the paper ballot, or filled in by the voter on the paper ballot, is your ultimate defense against hacked or hackable voting machines. And so the ability to recount the paper ballots is what you have to protect yourself against computer hacking. But the paper ballots don't do much good if you never look at them. And so I would urge New York State to consider the adoption of risk-limiting audits. That's a way to take a small statistical sample of the paper ballots and recount them by hand. Now, no state should roll out risk-limiting audits statewide all at once. It's an administrative procedure that takes time to learn how to do and to train the county election administrators on what it's for and how to do it. It would be worth doing some pilots to experiment with the procedures. And that way you can be sure that even if someone were to hack your voting machines, you could detect it and you could correct it without having to do a do-over election. And I thank you for your attention. I'd be happy to answer any questions if you have them.
Thank you.
No, thank you. I appreciate your comment.
Okay.
I just want to say one thing. You want to speak?
I just wanted to ask a question of Professor Pop.
I don't know yet. What do you know?
Is that
She
okay?
wants to ask the question.
It's not particular, it's just to clarify.
Go ahead.
Okay, go ahead.
Can you tell us which systems are the hybrids that you described, which specific systems?
By hybrid, I mean any system whose ballot printer is in the same paper path with deposit of that ballot into the ballot box. So they would include systems like the Express Vote, the Express Vote XL, the Dominion ImageCast Evolution, and I'm not sure I'm aware of any others at the moment.
All right, so does anyone else want to speak? Lulu? You want to do it from there, or do you want to?
There's no microphone.
I don't know what's best for
Doesn't matter.
Commissioner Peterson, though, to see her. I don't know, to stand somewhere in particular.
Can you see her over there?
I can stand over here, it's fine.
I can move the camera.
Hi, thank you so much for taking the time to take our comments today. My name is Lulu Freistat. I'm the Communications Director of Smart Elections. I'm a journalist and documentary filmmaker. I've worked in network television for about 10 years. So, Smart Elections has been advocating against the adoption of the hybrid voting machines. We're extremely concerned about them. We have a technical advisory team of highly respected people that we work with on our board. It includes people like Rich DeMillo from Georgia Tech, Joe Canary, who is somebody who is currently developing a voting system with a $10 million DARPA contract. We also take advice from David Bader, who is a computer security expert at Georgia Tech. Andrew Appel has given us a lot of advice. We're taking input from people who are considered the top election security experts in the country. And what we're hearing over and over again from these experts is that the hybrid voting machines are not secure. They simply cannot be secured. And the reason why the risk for these machines is so great is because unlike other machines, where if they were hacked, we would have a paper trail to catch that. The system that we have now is great. We have a hand-marked paper ballot, or we have a ballot marking device for voters with disabilities. They mark that ballot or have it marked for them, and then they put it into a separate scanner. And that paper ballot cannot be invalidated in any way by the machine. It's just a scanner. It takes a picture, does a count. And at the end of the day, if we're confused at all, if we're worried about how that machine has behaved, could be a problem, not even a hack, could be just a problem with mechanical issues. I've covered elections all over the country, and voting machines that I investigated in Wisconsin had a 2.5% error rate, those scanners. And they were decertified based on the research that I did. So machines can make mistakes. They can be hacked, and they can also just have mechanical errors. And what we want to know at the end of the day is that we've got a paper trail that the voter, that clearly communicates the voter's intent. We know that paper ballot is our final say of what the voter wanted. And with these hybrid machines, we do not have that confidence. And all of the hybrid machines, there's 3 on the market right now. There's the Dominion Ice that we've already certified. There's the Express Vote XL, which we are considering here in New York. And there's the Express Vote Hybrid, which is not on our plate right now. And all of those hybrids have the ability to mark that paper ballot after the voter signs off on it. And so it compromises our audit system. It completely undermines our process. And I cannot communicate to you how upset people are when they find out about this. So we have sent you letters, and at the last meeting, we had sent you at least 73 letters, and I sent you a packet this morning that I hope you all got. We were actually stunned to hear those letters represented as several people wrote the board. We had a lot of people writing to us and saying, we're upset about this and we're sending a letter to the commissioners. And so we did it again a couple days before this meeting. We have people writing to you, and I hope you'll notice we weren't able to collate all of them, but we did put together a packet of over 60 letters that we sent to you. We're not trying to fill up your email box or, slow down your process. I know email, you need your email to function, but we are trying to demonstrate to you that the public is very, very concerned about this issue. New York has always had strong election security, and it's really important for us to continue to be a leader on this issue, to show other states this is how it's done. We want hand-marked paper ballots here, durable paper. The Express Vote XL is with thermal paper. It's a very flimsy paper. Who's to say that it would actually last that 22-month period that it's legally required to last? And the Express Vote XL has other problems. It's a touchscreen machine, as Professor Appel talked about. It can go out of calibration. It can change your vote that way. It's a barcode. It uses barcodes to count votes. Those barcodes cannot be interpreted by a person. If you vote for a candidate and then you see a barcode, would you be able to look at that barcode and tell who you voted for? You can't. It's not transparent. And people do not want to vote on systems that they do not trust and that are not transparent. We implore you, please, it is your job to protect the votes of New York and New Yorkers' choices. And we need you to do your job on this. We want the Dominion Ice decertified. We do not think that there was adequate discussion of it at the last meeting. It was a 76-page security report, and it was discussed for less than 10 minutes. And the information in that security report has not been adequately disseminated and really gone through and understood. That security report said that the risk of this impact was very high. And then what it did is it took the job of protecting us from a very high impact security threat, and it put it in the hands of low-level employees with no technical expertise, poll workers. They are supposed to watch that printer and it's printing again, or put a foam block in the machine. I mean, imagine as the lines pile up, they're going to be taking a foam block in and out of a machine between accessible sessions and non-accessible sessions. They're going to take the cover off the machine, possibly voiding the warranty. They're going to take the printer cartridge in and out of the machine. Really? They're not. They're not going to do that. So these steps that have been listed to supposedly mitigate this threat, they're simply not realistic steps. This machine is not secure. And we need the board to do their job and decertify this machine, and we do not want the Express Vote XL certified under any circumstances. It is not a safe system. We have never had touchscreen voting here in New York, and we do not want it. I thank you so much for your time and your courtesy in listening to us today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, does anybody else want to speak? Jarrett?
Hi everyone, my name's Jared Berg. I'm the co-founder of a group called Vote Early NY. We're focused on early vote implementation and education in New York to make sure that the new law that's been enacted gets implemented appropriately around the state. I'm the former voter protection director of one of the two major political parties in the state. So I'm here primarily to discuss the new early voting regs and just the quickly changing landscape that we're all laboring under. With the caveat that I understand that you folks are limited by what the new statute says as you design your regs, I do want to urge the board to develop regs with a mindset that recognizes that the early voting dynamics are just different than election day, and that some of those processes can look a little different, of course, within the bounds of the law or future adjustments to the law. So for example, there are certain urgencies, considerations around the need for scanning as many ballots as possible in an election day, single election day model, contemporaneously with when a voter comes in, checks in, marks their ballot, that just don't really apply when it comes to an early voting model where you have 2 weekends, 2 weeks, since we're not actually tabulating or canvassing any ballots until close of polls on election night or an hour before. And so, for example, New York City's taken the position that the testing requirements for scanners prohibit a vote centers model. And so they've then taken, based on that, we believe, they've then made a decision to regionalize the entire city, limiting folks to a single poll site, not just in the city of New York where they're a voter, but in the county, the borough, where they're registered to vote. And so I'd suggest that it might be possible to regionalize the scanners and have a vote-centered model, rather than regionalizing the entire city and every voter, millions and millions of people. And that a well-designed reg that took that into account could address that as one potential flexibility that would never be looked at for an election day model. So that's just a suggestion of where we can go here, and you folks are in a position to help design the architecture of this program that's going to be in place forever. Or until future amendment. Also, it appears that with respect to the city, the new law really is treating the single citywide BOE as 5 counties, 5 separate counties for voter access purposes, and that's leading to a lot of undesirable consequences. Just mention that to you folks. There's some things you might be able to do by reg, and other influence you might have. Just to point out that the new law provides for borough-wide voting at best, but not citywide, and of course people who live in the 5 boroughs work between the boroughs. So the concept of early voting as vote near work, or where you might have child or elder care obligations, sort of breaks down in a New York City model. That could happen in other counties if people work between county lines, but the accessibility is just different outside the 5 boroughs. So the other thing is the equitable citing provisions that are in this law do refer to county, but I just don't understand how in the case of the city of New York that could be interpreted when you have a citywide election, which actually we do have this year. So, you know, just a quick example, there's 7 early voting sites designated for Staten Island, 313,000 registered voters, 7 early voting sites designated for Manhattan with 1.1 million and change registered voters. It's incredibly inequitable. And just between those 2 counties, even if the law technically permits that, I don't see how you could read the word county into that provision, at least when there's citywide or multiple county elections. So the next point I just want to make quickly, there's a rule and exception provision in this law. It's very clear. It says any voter may vote at any polling place for early voting in the county that such voter is registered. It does give 2 very limited, very clear exceptions to that, and I think it's important that as these boards choose to make that determination, they're doing so on the record, and they're doing so on a recurring basis after each election event. I could understand that with the new regs and new processes, 2019 might be one thing, but if counties are still choosing to segment or partition or regionalize their counties several cycles from now, I can't see how that's not a violation of the law if other counties with similar populations or dynamics have figured out how to move to a vote centers model, which the law makes perfectly clear that is the goal of this legislation. With that, I do want to touch on the machines since it's an issue of import, and to the extent it does impact the new early voting program. I'm not a cybersecurity expert, but I have heard that the physical ability to mark a ballot after a voter verifies it, that appears to create a risk of meddling that just undermines the hallmark of New York State election security. Everyone in this field talks about how New York held out and embraced those paper ballots, and so we know that ballots need to be voter verified or verifiable prior to their being cast and counted, and I think there's similar concerns that exist for a machine that reads a barcode. More importantly, I actually think from a just a process standpoint and a logistical standpoint, there's enough change going on right now as there is. There's enough training to be done next month based on regs you folks are finalizing this month, that to move to an entirely new set of machines on top of that, where I've been told specifically by the ES&S vendor at a demonstration not a month ago that they're ready to proceed with a ballot on demand model based in part on what's being done for in-person absentee. That's doable with the machines that are in place right now. So there is no urgency to adopt these machines across the state at this point, and I'd urge the board not to go in that direction and instead to focus on the change that's coming this year and next year and the year after that. So thank you so much for the opportunity as well, and I appreciate all the hard work you folks are doing.
Thank you, Jared. And we did receive your written suggestions with respect to the regulations, and I think that there were several ideas and concepts that you pointed out that we are seriously considering, that when the final regulations are adopted, you may see some of those proposals that you made incorporated in the text. Particularly how to address the distinction within New York City between county and city functions for the assignment of poll sites. All right. So I think we'll start with.
Go ahead. Is everyone done? Are we, as far as the comments? I just wanted to say and I think, I'm speaking on my behalf, election security is a top priority of this agency. It has been for years, and certainly we understand with the new voting systems that we put into place 10 years ago in this state, the electronic machines that we have, the optical scan, security is a top priority. It continues to be a top priority as we go forward with e-poll books. Again, security is a top priority. So I know there's security concerns. We've heard them for years, frankly. A number of the issues you've brought up here today, we've certainly taken into consideration as we go forward with our certification process. We have a very rigorous process in this state. Commissioner Kellner was very involved in developing this early on, as was I, because I was here as an employee of the agency back in those days, and we've taken it very seriously, and we think we've done a very forward-looking job in trying to make sure that our election systems in this state are secure, and we take that seriously. So we appreciate your comments today, but I want you to be assured that that is a top priority of this agency, and as we go forward, it will continue to be.
Well, I certainly agree with that.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that what I want to say before is that we listen very carefully to what you say, and it's considered very carefully. So as we continue our discussions on evaluations, your comments will be taken into effect.
I would just like to add that your comments will be taken into effect and that it will be very serious. Certainly what you've said this morning does not fall on deaf ears, and it adds to our review of all the entire process as far as security is concerned. We'll move in that direction as we try to either certify, decertify, or move ahead to make sure that that every single vote is counted and is secure. That is a top priority of this agency, always has been and always will be. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Commissioner Peterson. Can I just ask, how would we be kept abreast of your process? Because one of the things that was a little concerning to me, things seem a little opaque. I was in contact with Cheryl ahead of time. She didn't have an agenda. She didn't know what was going to be discussed today. It was a tremendous amount of organizational work. We have many more people downstairs who didn't fit in this room, who came up here today, who are concerned about this. So we just would like to know if you are going to move to decertify the Dominion ice, or if there's conversations about that. How would we be kept abreast of that, or be aware of what process is happening? So it seems a little opaque right now.
Well, I don't think it's opaque. I mean, our meetings are open. We do stream our meetings, as every meeting we have is on the internet, and they're archived, so you're certainly welcome to look back at meetings that we've had and see the discussions that have taken place. Our agendas are public. As you're here today, you're welcome to attend meetings whenever we have them. Whatever the room allows as far as the number of people, but you're certainly welcome to come back to any meeting you want to. We think we have a very open process as far as our discussions, our considerations, and how we're proceeding with this. So I'm not sure what more we can do, but
I just want to say, at our last meeting, we had the CEO of Dominion here. And I know I gave him hell. I talked to him and compared him with the Boeing situation. He got very upset about it. He didn't think it was as important as Boeing. I made that clear that we thought it was as important. We then went on to look at the certification again that we did before. We had it investigated and looked at. We got a report, and we had that report at the last meeting. And the meeting was public.
Right, and the report is a public document.
Right.
The express vote certification process does include several public demonstrations, and so people who want to receive notice of that should notify John Conklin or Cheryl Kauser to be put on that notification list. And isn't there a plan to put it up on the website? No.
We post to the website when we've scheduled that event.
Right.
It's usually when we're a little further along, we have a
Oh, for the public demonstration, yes.
Yeah.
I would always go on the website beforehand.
Yes.
Right.
Could the agenda be up any earlier? The agenda really wasn't up until yesterday.
The agenda doesn't get set usually until the day or two before the
yeah,
meeting.
I mean, that's just the way we work. Typically, things come together and then we put an agenda out when it's finalized. Typically, that won't be till pretty close to the meeting date itself, just by the nature of our business. So it's hard to get an agenda out too early. Frankly, we like to know what the agenda is too.
Yeah, right.
Prepared to come here, so,
Yesterday.
I'm not gonna say to you, we don't have an interest in getting it done relatively early, but we understand that with all of the different projects that are being undertaken by this agency, particularly now with all the changes that have occurred in the legislature over the last couple of months, we're trying to address issues as quickly as we can, and as we set board meetings, we try to make sure we get as much on the agenda as we can that's ready to go. So the staff is trying to get things together, and we're trying to accommodate them. So I can't say we can get the agenda out too much earlier. It's just the nature of the business at this point.
I guess if you're gonna make a decision about a certification of a voting machine, that's something that people might wanna know in advance. This is, we didn't know, is this the meeting where the certification for the Express XL is gonna be decided or not? So we're, and people, it's a big decision for people to come up here, to take a day off work, to pay $50 for a bus ticket or whatever, and it's a difference to them. Oh, is this the meeting where they're actually gonna make a decision or no? And if this goes on, I don't know how long this process is gonna go on, but I'm just saying it's helpful for people to know, is this where I really need to be there to let them know I care about this, or is this like 3 meetings down the road? It's people have a right to know, so they can make a plan to be here if it's important to them.
Yeah, fair enough. I'm not sure how we
don't know
can.
either.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, the time is dictated by a number of issues. The vendor has to submit documents. Our testing agent has to, test them. Those are not things we control here because it's not our personnel. But I think if you are in contact with staff, they'll try to let you know if you have an interest in a particular issue, like the certification of the XL machine, as to the progress and what the time frame looks like, so you guys can be aware if you want to come up and attend. you know, we'll certainly do the best we can to keep you informed of that. I don't think it's going to happen right away. Frankly, we have a number of steps to go through before we can certify, but I can't give you a specific time frame of how long that's going to take.
All right, and what about the documents from NYSTEC and from SDI? Are those going to be available online for people to review and security experts to review?
Tom, do we put those up online?
I don't think we posted them online, and we'd have to take a look at it and just figure out a public version if we're gonna post it.
We could.
I mean, as far as I'm concerned, those are public documents.
Yeah.
I think what we're considering should be available to the public, because this is a transparent system. We're not trying to do this in any dark room. We want to make sure people know what we're doing and they're comfortable with what we're doing. You're right. You know, public confidence is a big deal to us, because the public needs to be confident that their voting system works and works correctly and is secure. So we do try to do everything we can in open. And so if you want documents and we have them, we'll make them available.
And just to ask, the FOIL application process is very simple. There's a, if you follow it on the web page.
It's fine, but if I don't know the certification, if the source code review is complete or not complete, I don't know when to FOIL. Do you know what I mean? Like, there has to be
I
some kind
understand.
of offering of what's
Okay.
going on, or we are really kind of working in the dark.
Well, we'll try to keep you in the loop, because we know you're interested, and we'll keep you posted.
Thank you so much, Douglas.
Okay, right.
May I add one piece of information?
All right, but
first?
Deborah was
Oh,
next.
sure.
Jennifer.
Oh, Jennifer, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I have a question. I'm wondering if you could explain to the people of New York why you already certified a hybrid system, the Dominion ICE, when experts have explained that it can mark machine marked paper ballot after the last time the voter has inspected it.
The answer is that the particular issue had not been raised at the time our own experts had given their certification reports, which is why we asked for additional examination. And the examination report, which is available and has been distributed, concluded that while it's theoretically possible that it is extremely unlikely that someone would be able to actually accomplish all of the steps required in order to have a successful hack.
Can you
Now,
explain to
that doesn't, pardon?
I'm sorry, I'm hoping you can explain though why you would take that risk. These systems are also more expensive than hand-marked paper ballots, correct?
Well, that's an issue. I hope it will still be something that the fellow commissioners will consider. But for now, go ahead.
I'm sorry, maybe I don't understand. What was your question?
Why would you take the risk, even if you're saying that it would be difficult to hack these hybrid machines so that they can mark the paper ballot after the last time the voter has seen it, so they can add fake votes?
I understand
Why would
that.
you take that risk?
Well, we've taken numerous steps to make sure that the machines are secure. That, I mean, there's a number of aspects to this, whether it's testing, whether it's, you know, pre-election testing, or whether it's actual manual control over the machines themselves. And I think you can read the report and you can see what steps we have taken and what we are having our local boards take to ensure the security of these machines. I mean, I'm not going to go through the whole report at this point, but I think you should read the report. That's what we relied on, and that's how we made our determination. And as these vendors come to us with proposals, we analyze them in the context of our rules and regulations and upon our experts' analysis of the security of the system and how well it works and what the security issues are and how to address them. And we rely on them to an extent to make our final decision. And we relied on those documents that you have access to.
Right, but there's nothing in there that eliminates the risk that was described by Professor Appel, which is that the machine can be hacked to add fake votes to a paper ballot after the last time the voter has seen it. There's nothing in there that eliminates that risk.
Well, I mean, if you talk about elimination, you're talking about a zero. I mean, I don't know that there's anything certain in our lives. Let me just finish. I'm not sure there's anything that's absolutely certain in our lives, but we've taken every measure to address the issues that were raised as far as the potential security issues. We took, as Commissioner Kellner indicated, we took extra measures after some issues were raised to make sure that we added procedures, added levels of security to address these specific issues. So I don't think you can say that we haven't done everything we can to address the issues that have been raised and that our experts have identified.
On the Dominion machine.
On the Dominion
On the
issue, which is the only
Dominion
one we've
machine.
certified, right.
Why would you certify a system that adds this extra risk? It makes no sense. The whole point of a paper ballot is to check for hacking, and with these machine-marked ballots, the paper ballot itself can be hacked. Why would you take that risk? It costs much more money than a hand-marked paper ballot system. Why add that extra risk in there? Why add the possibility of a hacked paper ballot when the whole point of a paper ballot is to check for hacking?
Jennifer, I think the commissioner's done his best to answer the question. I think what I would maybe just add to the conversation is that in this particular instance, what I think is really noticeable is that security experts outside of the people that you've hired are giving you very different information. And it's very important to notice that NYSTEC and SDI, they're saying these systems, this can be mitigated in this way, but you're seeing a large spectrum of security experts disagree with that evaluation and come to you. Professor Appel actually left his vacation. He was on vacation with his family and felt it was important enough to come here to say to you, I disagree with this report. I disagree with this assessment of low risk. And it's very important to note that we have security experts across the country saying, what you've done there, we don't think it's right.
That's the way you perceive it.
No, it's not the way I
No, it's the
perceive it,
way
it's
you
the way all of
perceive
these
it.
security experts
Just a
perceive
minute.
it.
I ran a large government, okay, had to make decisions like this all the time. I had to make decisions on what to secure. Whether I secure my amusement park, whether I secure my bathrooms, whether I secure, and I had to make a decision. I only had a certain amount of money, I had to look at it in terms of what the real risk was, and I would make it. I wouldn't protect this, I would protect that, etc., because the I didn't have to worry about it. That didn't mean they couldn't blow it up at some theoretical time. So that's the way we look at everything. I'm not applying what I'm saying now to this particular machine or anything. I'm just telling you that's generally what we look at. So here we are sitting, and we've got, I don't know how many PhDs or whatever saying one thing. Then we got a whole group of other PhDs saying another thing. So for every PhD, there's an equal and opposite PhD. And we have to look at all this. And we have to sift through all this. And that's what we're doing. We're doing it honestly, we're doing with a professional attitude, and we come to some conclusions. Now, everything I'm saying to you doesn't mean we've made up our mind on things. We have listened to you, and I know I have, and I have concerns, but I'm going to make the decision based on all the information I have, consultation with the people here, the experts that we have, and what I've heard. It's not easy. But it certainly isn't because we think that this is so dangerous we're going to pass it anyhow and people are going to overvote or whatever they're going to do.
I think you should understand, too, that these machines were not developed in a vacuum. They're done in response to the needs and requests of our voting population. And these types of machines have been deemed to be responsive to the disabled community as well as our non-disabled voters as well. So, the whole idea of the new voting machines in this country has been in large part to address the disabled community's need to be able to vote in a poll site with other voters. And these machines have been developed in part to address some of the issues that have been raised to us and to the voting community in general, because we're not the only state that's looking at this. This is a nationwide issue. It's a nationwide effort that's going on to develop voting machines that address the needs and requests of our voting population. So these voting machines weren't just created out of whole cloth or out of in a vacuum. They were done in consultation with a lot of our communities that seek to have their right to vote protected.
I would just like to address that issue specifically in regard to the Dominion NICE, because the voters with disabilities do not like that machine. And in fact, when it was scheduled to be certified last October, 5 separate disability advocacy groups wrote and asked that it not be certified. They were so unhappy with it. And I actually, if you look at the investigative report that we've done on the Dominion ICE, it's on our website, smartelections.us, we went out into the disability community and I interviewed 2 separate disability advocates, and they do not like the machine whatsoever. And on top of that, they're very worried that it's going to create long lines, because the way it's set up, the voter with a disability is voting, and their session may take 15, 20 minutes, a half hour. Meanwhile, voters without disabilities are waiting to scan their ballots through. You can get another piece of equipment to kind of, modify that situation, but then again, you're getting more expensive and more equipment. The way the machine is designed is something that the disability community has actually been very vocal about not being happy with, and they said specifically to me in that report, if you watch it, you'll hear Lisa Terracone from the Westchester Independent Living Center say, we were not asked about these machines were not tested with us, we have not been involved in the development, and they were very unhappy with it. So I know that's the narrative that the Dominion ICE is for the disability community, but if you speak to them, and we are developing very strong relationships with the disability community because we're very concerned that they have a good experience, you will hear that the Dominion ICE is not their answer.
I just suggest, though, that we avoid stereotyping and using the phrase "the disability community" as if
Well,
they speak with a single voice.
5 separate groups, though, wrote.
Right, and there
That's a
are
pretty
other groups
strong
who
voice.
have, and there are other groups who have taken opposite positions. That's all I'm saying is that you wanted to.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt. I'm Julie Weiner. I'm active with Citizens for Voting Integrity New York, as well as being here with Smart Elections today. I just want to say, Commissioner Spano and Commissioner Kilner, I watched the March meeting here and was very moved by your efforts to make sure that the Dominion ICE got reviewed. And to tell you the truth, I was a little disappointed with the results in the April meeting, when it did seem to me that the review was accepted without much discussion. It looked to me like a defeat, and especially when I read some of the expert reviews of the review, it was shocking to me that after what was said about the bizarre so-called mitigations, it was shocking to me that was not enough of a factor in your decision. It seemed to me that just the fact that you were satisfied with just the fact that there had been another informal review, and it almost didn't matter what the review said. Addressing the issue of responding to the needs of the voters, our position is that there isn't an adequate procedure in place for ensuring that it's the voters' needs that are heard rather than the needs and financial needs of the vendors that are taken into account. That we believe, and perhaps you can support us in requesting this from the legislature, that there needs to be developed an RFP process where perhaps the county boards of elections and you as a board of elections can do something to get a sense of what the voting machine needs and requirements are, and set out an RFP so there could be a competitive process rather than leaving it completely up to the vendors to decide what you get to certify. As I read the law, maybe you can correct me, you guys don't really have a choice as to what machines you get to review. It's up to the vendors to submit the ones they want to you. So if they submit the most expensive machines, what do you have? That's all you have in front of you. And meanwhile, they're saying the old machines, they're going to charge an arm and a leg, or they're no longer going to maintain them. So it seems to me you're really in a passive position relative to the vendors. And I hope you will support, and perhaps it requires change in the legislation. I know you sometimes submit suggestions for legislative changes. I think it's necessary for a legislative change, or maybe a procedural change, so that you're not the passive recipient of the vendor's proposals for what to certify. And finally, I want to make you aware, if you're not, that on May 15th, Senator Ron Wyden, with the support of our Senator Kirsten Gillibrand, updated his PAVE Act, Protecting American Votes and Elections Act. So May 15th, there's an update, and it specifically bans the use of any voting machine. It would ban, if it's passed, the use of any voting machine anywhere in the country that has the mechanical potential to mark a ballot subsequent to voter review. So there's also some developing national political pressure taking into account the concerns of the election security community and trying to prevent these machines from going into service in the United States, especially for the 2020 election, especially in the light of the really horrifying high probability of highly professional and technically sophisticated hacking, unpredictable in its effects. You can't know what techniques hackers are developing until they're already out there, and then you can mitigate them. So I don't think there's any election security expert who can predict that that by 2020 it'll still be improbable that these machines that have the mechanical ability to remark our ballots won't be hackable. Thanks.
Craig.
Yes, hi. I think someone made a really important comment just a little bit ago that voters with disabilities are not a monolith, and I very much agree with that. And I think that there is an assumption that all forms of disability benefit from the use of a ballot marking device. But as Professor Rich Lowe at Georgia Tech, he's a computer scientist there and an election expert, has been pointing out repeatedly, voters with cognitive impairment actually find ballot marking devices much more difficult to use than a hand-marked paper ballot. So the assumption, the underlying assumption that all or even most voters with disabilities would be only able to use a ballot marking device appears to be a faulty premise. And the only other thing I wanted to mention is I hadn't heard anyone say anything about the autocast feature on these ballot marking devices. If I missed it, I apologize, but this is a feature where it gives the voter the option to not review the paper printout, what we're calling a paper ballot, the machine marked printout. It gives them the option to not review it at all, which seems like a very blatant and very obvious invitation to fraud, and I don't think you need to have a PhD to see that. Thank you.
All right. So let's move on to the regular part of our agenda then, which we start with the reports of the co-executive directors, Bob Grimm and Todd Valentine.
Thank you. It's been certainly a busy time between our two meetings, previous one and today, preparing for the items that are before you to consider. Some good news. We had asked you at the last meeting to approve a plan for the apportioning of the $24 million in grant money, the $10 million aid to localities, and the $14 million for the capital fund. We provided that plan to the county boards of elections and gave them a little bit more time if they were to consider expanding the number of early voting sites, because the money helped them to at least be something to consider. We have 100% response. Those counties that had a little bit of a tug or war somewhat between them have all responded. We're at 245 early voting sites, and where they needed to, in many instances it went beyond the bare minimum. In some areas they may still decide at a later date to expand that number. So we are using the information that the counties provided us. We've updated the grant award amounts, and we are proceeding in our next phase with OGS to finish the preparation of those contracts so the counties can get them and start to understand better that there will be a reimbursement program and these are the values that they can plan on.
Let me ask you a question about that. Do you get a sense that the finances are impacting the decisions the counties are making regarding how many early voting sites they're having in their county? And I say that because I noticed that a large number of our counties are at one. I mean, I think I counted 34 of the 62 counties are at just one site. Is it your sense that the funding mechanism was adequate to allow counties to do more than that, or that funding or the money that was available was impacting their ability to add more sites?
I think the fact that we calculated amount per early voting site gave them an ability to cover, especially in the age of localities, to cover the logistical cost of paying people and to have a site open for 9 days, cover those 60 hours. So 15,000 per site, I think, helped them if money was the cause. I don't think money was the real reason why they made the final determination. I think the fact that there are so many parts yet, to be decided, the stubs, the perforations, the, timing, getting enough staff to cover everything. There are already small boards with not a large staff, 2 part-time commissioners generally, maybe 2 full-time employees at the board. So I think there's a lot that is being added. This is not the only law that they have to implement this year. So I think it's the totality of everything as we roll it out this year. Hopefully next year, when we have 2 primaries and a general election to administer this money, to administer early voting, that they would make other decisions perhaps to
What's your
expand
sense,
them.
though, this money was appropriated by the legislature, was like $24 million basically total. Is that something that's going to be a reoccurring allocation to our boards, or is this a one-shot? I mean, do you expect next year they'll get another allocation to help them offset their costs? Or do you think this was just a one-time? I mean, the way it was done in the budget, I don't know, was it done as a one-shot, or was it done as a reoccurring?
I think it's
only done as a one-shot.
It's very,
Well, it's coming
The
out
o-
of Harlem.
because it's a reimbursement, the
No,
only thing
no.
we've kind of discussed is at what point is it end?
Okay.
It's not forever money like some of the other grants when we discussed with the Division of Budget. I don't think they expect this to last years and years and years to finally use this money. Considering that the estimates from the county were well above $100 million anyway.
Right.
We don't envision that issue. The only question that we have is, could all the counties get reimbursed by the end of the fiscal year? So in our draft that we've prepared and shared, we envision that the reimbursement could go as late as December 31st of next year, just to give the counties the time to get the paperwork. But generally speaking, I think all this money would probably be spent well before the fall, and it's just a matter of when do the counties get us the paperwork.
I mean, my concern is that, I'm sorry, can you
If
just
I
want
could
to say
just
something?
comment, I
Sure.
think that the timing of how quickly this came out, with all the moving parts, with the inadequate funding that everyone agrees to, whether we say it out loud or not, it was woefully deficient. In addition, the funding mechanism to the counties is a refund.
Right.
So you have to put the money up front, and then you're reimbursed, and all the local budgets had been done for the year. I think moving into next year, they'll be able to address it with their counties, and some will have the money and some will not have the money. So I think depending upon those circumstances, you may see an increase in some of the 31 or 2. But, it's costing them a lot of money, and they don't have the time.
Okay. I mean, my concern is, and I think I raised it at the last meeting, we're seeing a lot of the upstate counties with one site. And I know that they meet the statute because the statute was based on number of registered voters. But in upstate, that's not really the calculation. It's distance. It's a fact that if you're in St. Lawrence County and you have one site in Canton or wherever it is, that's a long ways for people to have to drive to get to their site, and that's not unusual. I say St. Lawrence, but it's not just St. Lawrence. I mean, there's a lot of upstate counties that are large geographically, and yeah, they meet the statute because they have fewer than 50,000 voters, but we're asking people to drive now, you know, long distances, and I just would like to know if it's because, you know, the state isn't adequately funding it, and that's what's causing this, or if the locals have actually decided, no, one's enough, and that's all we need. But I'd hate to think that our upstate voters are suffering because, you know, this unfunded mandate was dumped on them. They don't have the money. I know a lot of these counties are strapped. I know our boards already have funding problems, and that they, you know, cannot fund more than one, and then the upstate voters are left with, well, you got to drive 30 miles to go vote, which isn't very practical.
Some of the, I think with everything out there, that you have to just think about this, let this go the way it is right now, and then take a real close look at this next year, because you know it's a real problem. How do you go to a county that has 5,000 votes? A county has 5,000 voters, or 5,000 citizens, and has monumental territory. What do you do? How much money do you allocate to that to have convenient voting
plus some of those, I mean, the rural communities face unique challenges just as the major metropolitan areas do with space. But some of the rural communities really don't even have Wi-Fi connectivity throughout their entire county. So to have the remote sites that you can't connect and then still prevent early voting is a unique problem for them that they've actually articulated to us. So that's going to take more time than, okay, by, you know, July 15th, you have to have, you know, so there's all those concerns too that need to be looked at and see if mechanisms can be put in place to make it a smoother transition for some of them.
I think the quickness of picking them too, that because of the need to pick them, you know, identifying a site, you know, they first focused on the poll sites they currently have, but to use that poll site for 60 hours over 9 days, plus election day, probably didn't gel together as much as perhaps would help.
And that's 4 or 5 times a year.
And then they had to pick the sites before they knew the equipment that they could use them to run multiple sites, because we're only approving electronic poll books today. Those were not available when they started doing their decision-making process. Plus, for the multiple sites, often counties are going to look for on-demand ballot printers. Those aren't quite available yet, even by statute. So the tools that they need to have the multiple sites, the counties were forced, and certainly I think money was definitely an aspect to it. But what we're doling out is only going to start for 1 year, and there's no promise that what doesn't get spent this year even gets reappropriated next year. I mean, that's certainly something we have to warn the counties of, because as Kim said, they already have their money to spend, except for those that add additional funds or have available. Like Nassau County, we know, is bonding. New York City has much deeper pockets. But the smaller counties don't have that money to upfront it until next year when they can budget for it. And hopefully they can get the reimbursement in time and do something. But I mean, we're going to anticipate trying to get it reappropriated so that they can spend through the next year. But there was no promise made that that would happen.
Yeah, but you have, problems are all conjecture at this moment. Next year they won't be.
Right.
Next year we'll see it.
Or there might be
You know
new
what
ones.
the specific problems are. And then people will get involved in whatever they need.
But next year comes fast.
I
because
understand, but I mean,
November to April.
at least you'll have the scope of what you're dealing with is a lot.
Next year's going to come fast.
So just, we shared this information, of course, with the county boards of election. We appreciated their work to, for those that hadn't resolved their differences, they all did. I think that's great. I don't know how we would have mitigated that, but certainly we, both Todd and I and others, talked to the counties and tried to give them a path forward, and luckily they did. So that was helpful. We're going forward with the contract. We shared the information with the Division of Budget to hopefully get the approval of the $10 million grant allocation by the Director of the Division of Budget, because that's in the budget language. We shared the numbers with NYSAC, both in draft form.
So you're saying you don't have budget sign-off on the plan yet?
Only on the aid to locality. It requires the Director of the Division of Budget to approve it. We met at the staff level as to what we, after our last meeting where we came up with our own recommended plan. We gave them the draft at the time based on what counties had given us by May 1st. And we told them because this money may help or other decisions that are happening during that period of time, we gave to the end of May for the counties to update the list, but we had to freeze it at that point so that we can make the contracts and get going with the next round. So I think we gave as much opportunity as we could in order to keep moving forward to the counties. There may be counties that, based on other answers, modify their plan between now and October anyway. You know, some are waiting for the decisions before they open up, you know, modify their plans. Others are, you know, they may have 4 sites, but if we don't allow perfs and stubs to, and on-demand ballots, well, then they may be regional instead of go to any site, just because of the nature of where we're at in the process. With those caveats.
So what's the status of those? There's legislation to
They passed.
adopt this no stub and the color issue. I mean, have those been passed?
The color issue passed the Senate. It is on 3rd reading in the Assembly.
Because what do we have, 5 days left, 6 days left in the session, or pretty close to the end?
19th, I think, is our last day of session. We still have the presidential primary bill that I'm told is getting printed today that has to come out, so there's a couple more that are coming. Okay. But the color is helpful because it's the cost of the on-demand. The perf and stub bill passed both houses already. Okay. Nothing has gone to the governor since the budget except one bill. So I think they're trying to not, you know, all the staff's busy negotiating the last couple of days of session. I haven't seen any bills go over. Hopefully they will. We've certainly had conversations with them about how important the stub bill is. There's also the bill to correct the uniform deadline for the new parties to get a certificates of nomination, which would move it to September 1 instead of, I forget the date in my head.
But some of these bills impact the board's ability to implement some of this,
Yes.
like on-demand ballots.
Correct.
Yeah.
I mean, we keep reporting to them the progress when they pass, but we tell them, you know, it's waiting to go to the governor.
But the stub bill has passed both houses,
Yes.
so I think
Good.
people can.
Good chance that's gonna go through.
They
Yes.
should just send it.
Yeah, okay,
rely on.
okay, good.
Couple of other items, certainly,
And could I just say, the stub bill isn't a solution by itself, because the county still has to have a ballot accountability plan, although some of these e-poll book vendors have incorporated good ballot accountability systems into their e-poll book systems.
we've been reviewing that with, there are about 11 e-poll, or soon ballot on demand vendors in some form or another who have contacted us, or we've contacted them. You know, co-directors sent out a communication to all of them to explain to us their ballot accountability provisions, if they haven't already, in what they've given us, so that we can look for the commonality between them as we write the procedures and the regulations, or at least prepare to write them.
And at least ballot on demand has been used by some counties for the absentee ballot system, so they're not wholly unfamiliar with those processes in the larger jurisdictions.
And we have existing ballot accountability provisions beyond stubs and numbers, or, you know, perfs anyway. That, you know, it's not like we're starting from nothing.
Right.
We have a pretty good written procedure in addition to that we just have to use the you know, the law points out to the extra information that you'd get out of these systems in order to add to that accountability.
Right, and we've been taking input from the counties. You know, we have a work group to help us develop the procedures for early voting. That we've met once in person, we've met by phone, we have another meeting scheduled for next week by phone to go over the processes so that they can understand the nuts and bolts of what has to happen on a daily basis through the 9 days of early voting, because it's a little different, you know, but there, again, we have a lot of existing procedures that will have that accountability to make sure that the security's there on a daily basis. So yeah, it's coming together, but you know, once the legislation, and why it's not getting sent to the governor, I don't know. But it would help.
The only other item I have on my list is we were invited to the Senate hearing last week on automatic registration. We both responded in, I'd say uniformly the same opinion, which is no surprise to anybody. At the time of the budget negotiations, since automatic registration in addition to online registration were discussed, Bill Cross at least looked at an estimate of time and money to develop a system. So that certainly is an important thing to point out. We don't have money yet to build the online registration system. We are working to come up with a project plan that would identify the money that's needed to complete that effort, and to then work with Division of Budget, who has indicated that they will work to get us that money. So we don't know how much we need to build it. We're working to come up with a plan, and we don't know when we'll get the money to build it. All we know is it's supposed to be built by April 12th, 2021, which is also part of our factor. Our estimate was it would take us 3 years. So when we come up with that plan and that money, we'll have to ask the legislature perhaps to extend the effective date once we know we have money under that plan. I don't anticipate that automatic will get done in the next 5 days of session, but certainly we laid out again the amount of money it would take to do it. It's similar number of years, what the impact on county governments would be to pay to upgrade their systems, and also the rest of the agencies would have to automate. We have no money estimated on what it would take or time it would take to add it to any of the agencies that are listed in the proposed bills, as far as the changes they would need to make to put this process into their business rules. So I think that at least summarizes what I said at that period of time.
Well, we're still struggling with the lack of funding. I mean, these initiatives, none of the new initiatives, absent the grant program for the counties, were funded, and we can only take a portion of one grant to help us with some of the costs we know will have to occur in testing the poll books, because there is a cost to ensure that they operate correctly, and again, a cost we have to do in the future to make sure that they operate in the field, because we still have to test the security. You can test the security in the laboratory, but you have to have it set up in the field in order to ensure that it was set up correctly and operates there. This is hamstringing us in a big way. We are stretched to the max, even to try to get additional positions approved to assist with operations. Still hasn't been approved by the Civil Service Commission. They've had that for months. They say it's on the agenda for June, but we still haven't seen it. So,
and the money's there.
Well, the money's still a problem. We're still short on money, but I can't even get the positions created just to provide the assistance to help with the workload. So
What positions are you talking about?
well, we have identified a series of 6 positions to assist with the operation of the operations unit that can help with the ballot access, the outreach to the counties, and continue with our voting system testing plan. Plus now we've had to add the support of the e-poll books on top of that. Plus the counties will need support with the on-demand ballot printers. So it would be assist with logistics, administrative support, as well as in the testing.
You're talking people that would be actually out in the field, that would go out to the counties to assist with their development of these
Some
new
would,
systems?
yes, some
Well,
would.
some have, yes.
Yes.
I see.
I mean, our procedures require that we do that oversight anyway, but certainly they are questions that need to be answered.
Right, and you have to have somebody in the field to do that. Now, we do send people out because we have other requirements to go in the field, but they're people that are designed to do one task, not necessarily all the tasks that are necessary in the field. I mean, we look for voting operation procedures, voter list maintenance procedures, so we are hamstrung. More work, less money, can't get more people.
Sound like a
Tom,
county
these are your
executive.
people?
Sound like a mayor.
These would be in your unit.
Department head.
So your current staff is not adequate to be able to go out to do these extra services? Is that the problem, and you need
currently they either don't have, with some of the different things, we have technology, so there's obviously a different kind of skill set on some of the new technologies. We also have a number of vacancies, long-time vacancies in our unit already. So we were trying to figure out what new tasks were we being given and what tasks that we already have that we didn't have people anymore to help us with, and trying to figure out what those positions would look like that could really be the most efficient way of operating.
So these technical type positions, is that what you're
It's
looking
kind
at?
of a mix. Some of them, like Todd was saying, there's some that's a little bit more administrative because some of our vacancies were more administrative, but some of them are definitely going to be slightly technical, but definitely going out, possibly just doing, outreach training, supporting all the other things that we're doing in our unit.
Right, we've shifted people from other units, but the problem is the other units, take compliance, for example. This is a local year. Now, we think of that as a down year, but they get a lot more filings this year, and those are now changed for the schedule. So you have the 3 that you would normally have later in the year for September, now are occurring in the June time period. The July periodic's gonna come, and then it's gonna go into the the general election periodic. So the compliance unit is out doing training, they're doing training now. So we've been able to shift as needed for objections when we had our designated petition period, so that's been very helpful. But they have their own day-to-day jobs. So again, we're, and Bill can talk about how IT is stretched thin and tight.
So,
It's pretty thin, I think.
So I just know when the budget went through, we had concerns about adequate funding for the current staff.
Yeah.
And you guys told us that you thought we didn't have enough, but they allowed us to use some other money that was earmarked for a certain position and freed it up so we could use. So I'm just trying to understand how these new positions work within our budget constraints and whether we have the money to actually pay these people.
It is a good point. We need the titles so that when we do identify that money and can use it for whatever reason, there's some, we do have a certain turnover in the agency. Where's the greatest need, perhaps? But we need the title to be able to then work to get a body into the title.
Yeah, but that's not a monetary issue.
Well, it's part of it. So we have talked with the Division of Budget about this plan since February. We've talked with the DEP Secretary about this plan since he first was appointed, and we continue to talk to him about this plan. He did help us to get civil service to move on some of the IT-related positions that were critical for us, and we asked for this one too, and hopefully on that date it will at least to classify the job. Once I get the job classified, then my next discussion is now let's put somebody in it. I doubt we'd get all 6 at once, but certainly we'll start and keep working at it. It's very important, especially for some of the people to get in place, because we need them to learn how to do the job long before next year. That's not something you can do on the day when every petition in the state is being dropped on your desk. You have to have those systems and training done ahead of time. And certainly the ability this fall to go do the oversight of early voting and the county's response to all of what's being sent to them is critical. One, are they doing what we asked them to do? Are they understanding it? Are they doing it well? Is there feedback that we need to change what we're doing? We can't do that on web conferences all the time. There has to be people in the field to do that work. We keep making the case. I wish we had more progress to report.
Okay, anything else? Todd?
No.
No?
Nothing.
All right, so then we'll turn to the councils, Kim Galvin and Brian Quayle.
Thank you, Commissioner. The report today is somewhat truncated, but we can get into any area that the commissioners would like to. I'm going to start with new cases. We have 2 new cases since the commissioners last met. McKay versus the New York State Board of Elections, which is returnable tomorrow, which relates to New York's weighting provisions in the context of individuals who have submitted a change of enrollment, but they have lost their party enrollment as a result of their chosen party not having qualified to remain a party. And again, that's returnable tomorrow. We expect a decision relatively quickly on that matter. And then another matter in Nassau County, Kimmel versus the New York State Board of Elections, related to an individual seeking an extension of time on how long the individual would have to circulate an independent nominating petition. In both instances, we've been helpful to the Attorney General's office, which is representing the board. We've had a decision since the commissioners last met, or actually a sort of a proto-decision. A magistrate judge in the Northern District of New York in the DeRozier case has recommended to the judge in that case that the state's motion to dismiss, which is actually being treated like a summary judgment motion, should be granted. That case involved political speech ramifications under New York's electioneering statute at poll sites, and the magistrate has found that New York's statute, in tandem with New York's interpretation of its statute and definitive guidance that the board has issued, is constitutional and does not impinge on political speech beyond that which is required to meet the state's significant policy objective to creating a place of also, since the last since the last board meeting, there was an argument on a motion to dismiss in the League of Women Voters case that involved the constitutionality under the state constitution of the 25-day cutoff for voter registration before an election. We don't have a decision on that. Discovery is continuing in Common Cause and Upstate Jobs. With respect to the Common Cause case, we are preparing a staff report to the commissioners to give you a report on exactly where that case sits. The case has come along quite a ways, and we are preparing that. Submitted but argument not scheduled is the status of the Sugarman versus New York State Board of Elections case. It's quite some time ago that the CEC brought a proceeding related to the enforcement regulations. Both sides have requested oral argument, but the court has not yet scheduled that oral argument. As far as the compliance unit is concerned, we are now up to 123,436 disclosure reports received, and the unit has completed review on 112,620 of them. Since the last meeting, there have been no additional referrals from compliance to the enforcement unit. With respect to a couple of the last two non-filing reports that have been provided to enforcement, 84% of those referred as not having filed the July 2018 periodic remain unfiled. So that's 2,105 out of the original 2,500 remain unfiled. With respect to the January periodic, there are 97% of what was referred remain unfiled. To date, in 2019, no hearing officer cases have been brought by the Enforcement Council, so the Council's unit has not had to participate in the assignment of any hearing officers. And I think Kim had a few points that she wanted to apprise you of with respect to training and testing.
Thank you for telling me what I was apprising you.
You're welcome.
Basically, the training staff has been out on the road since your last meeting. They've done 11 training sessions, all of them for CPE credits, and at least 5 of them for CLE credits as well. And what is a good note is Brian attended one and had the same opinion as many people are calling up or letting us know that the new training staff is doing an excellent job. So they hit the ground running, and they're really, really very good. And we're hearing a lot.
You're talking about the financial disclosure training?
Yeah, the campaign finance. And so we're hearing a lot of good things back, even though it's their first real foray out into the counties. And also, our staff has been participating with IT in testing the new system that's coming out and reporting back issues to them. They've started the legislative over-contribution audit. They're deep into that. And they're also, if anyone's listening that happens to be a filer that hasn't provided an email address to us, they're busily trying to collect those because they will be necessary for the new system when it is ultimately rolled out. The other things we have, I think, are actual. I missed the beginning of Brian. So if he repeated it, if I'm repeating, is the two regulations that are ready for adoption later in the agenda. I think we've been busy. There's a lot more than that, but I don't know what it is.
Yes, well, everybody's been very busy between the regulations and the.
It's true.
New equipment in order to implement the very substantial legislative changes that occur. All right, we'll do public information. John Conklin.
You skipped me.
Oh. Yeah.
We can go out of order.
I mean, I don't mind.
No, I'm sorry. We do operations. See, I took my glasses off.
We didn't see you sitting there without the tie. That was the problem.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Go ahead, Tom.
Wow.
So with regard to the stuff that our unit's been doing, obviously we've been quite busy over the past month or so. The certification for the June primary was distributed to counties after the last meeting. That's for the Republican primary in the 57th Senate District and a number of JD and Alt-JD races in the 8th Judicial District. As far as voting machines, the ES&S Express Vote XL, the secondary source code review is underway. That process is still very early on as far as people wanting to know what timeframes are for such things. We have started the process of reviewing the requirements that need to be tested during our functional testing so that test cases can be updated and written. Obviously, because the machine is somewhat different from other machines we've looked at in the past, we have to look at the test cases that we've used, whether or not they're applicable and whether or not new ones need to be developed. With regard to Dominion, we did complete our testing on the secondary monitor, which was part of the original, which is not part of the original system that was certified. So that report is done. We'll be providing that to the commissioners for consideration at a future meeting. With regard to Clear Ballot, we've been providing NYSBOE with the final test cases, and our staff is beginning to write their report on that. The expectation is also to provide that report to you in the near future so that you could consider that at a future meeting. Kind of on a miscellaneous note, as Todd mentioned, unit staff has been working on some of the early voting procedures with other staff and other boards. We did have Heart InterCivic, which is another voting machine vendor, come in and do a demonstration of their equipment to our staff and to kind of discuss the New York certification process overall. And also, some of our staff had to provide some EMS training to some new staff in Columbia County. Lastly, which has taken up a lot of our time over the past, since last meeting, has been the e-poll books. May 3rd was the deadline for us to receive submissions from any vendors who are interested in having their systems evaluated. We received 5 submissions from different vendors. We evaluated all the documentation that was provided against the requirements that we had developed, both from functional requirements and also security requirements. We partnered with the New York State Division of Homeland Security and Emergency Services, as well as NYSBOE, to perform additional vulnerability scanning on the devices, the systems as a whole, both the hardware and the software components. We held day-long in-person demonstrations with each vendor so that they could show us on a number of the different requirements how their systems complied with that. We were also used that as an opportunity to kind of address any additional issues that had come up during our evaluation of the documentation that was submitted or during any of the vulnerability testing that had been conducted. We had prepared reports, which I believe all of you have had, for a number of systems to be considered for approval. And then for those vendors that are not on that list at this point, we continue to work with them to provide them with additional opportunities to show how their systems can demonstrate compliance with our requirements for possible future approval. Brendan, you have anything?
You covered it all.
Okay.
All right, thank you. All right, so now we'll go public information. John Conklin.
Thank you, Commissioner. Public information continues to be busy. Hot topics since the last meeting. I would say that early voting and questions about the changes to the time off to vote provision and the election law are probably running neck and neck as the top two issues we're asked about. We also had many questions about independent petitions for this time of year. The 32-day pre-primary report was due, so we got a lot of questions about that. Electronic poll books, the two new parties and how they do nominations, especially the Libertarians, enforcement complaints, questions about how caucuses work. The Libertarian Party got some media attention by claiming that the county boards had old links for voter registration forms, and Cheryl and Courtney investigated that, and they checked every county board site, and they were all up to date. We also had questions about judicial delegates. We participated in the monthly ECA call back in May. We continue to participate in the meetings on the cybersecurity plans. The unit processed 87 foils in April and 89 in May. We assisted in preparing the testimony for both co-executive directors for the Senate Elections Committee hearing on automatic voter registration, as Bob mentioned. We issued a press release on the voter registration deadline for the June 25th primary. For the website, we posted the transcripts for the March and April board meetings and the webcast for the April board meeting. We've put up an advisory on upcoming elections for the primary and the general election, including information about early voting. And a notice was posted to filers regarding the updated 2019 contribution limits. For NVRA, Patrick and Michael visited Schoharie, Fulton, Washington, Hamilton, Shenango, Otsego, Sullivan, and Ulster counties, covering just over 1,100 miles. All counties were found to be compliant. For our HAVA contracts, we're all up to date and signed. For the website accessibility coordinator stuff, we had 2 conference calls with our accessibility vendor, Level Access, to discuss provisions of the contract and the final settlement agreement in addition to testing protocols. We had internal meetings with IT to discuss other parts of the website that require action before the end of the year. To date, we have remediated just under 1,600 PDF documents for the website. Have anything, Cheryl?
We also have been coordinating with the Department of Homeland Security. They're having a tabletop the vote, which is a cybersecurity tabletop election-specific exercise. We will be participating from here on June 18th, and we will be presenting best practices surrounding risk assessment and training exercises for cybersecurity. And then similarly, we also participated in a NAS and NASID call, which is a National Association of Secretaries of State and the National Association of State Election Directors called. They created a social media working group of state communication directors, and this was just an introductory call, but the team will look at best practices surrounding how to deal with social media misinformation, and they will also include Twitter, Facebook, and Google, and other groups on that, so there are resources for states to reach out to.
Interesting. So, yeah, I'm sorry, Cheryl, what's that about? What's this misinformation, social media aspect?
Well, closer around elections at times, this is it stemmed out of a NAS conference where communication directors, and I did not attend in NASID, but had said around election times they have seen posts or campaigns on social media that just are inaccurate. For instance, poll sites are open from noon to 9 when perhaps it's 6 to 9 in that area, and they see posts and how do we deal with this? How do we do outreach? How do we coordinate together to make sure misinformation is corrected? In the past, there haven't been contacts so much in Facebook and Twitter and Google, so they wanted to make sure that states have outreach to those organizations and can deal with each other on this had happened to us, this is how we dealt with it, because it's becoming more prevalent since 2016.
And they can verify authoritative information.
Our pages, our Twitter and Facebook page have been verified, so if something is posted outward, they know that's a verified source, government agency.
Well, I think it's a positive thing that that group is organized, so that you have your counterparts in other states that you can consult with.
You've been dealing with Homeland Security on this issue, on the cybersecurity issue for a long time. You see no change in that at this point, in the amount of time they're spending with you?
Well,
overall,
in terms of like the tabletop stuff that Cheryl mentioned, they've been very aggressive in keeping that going and spreading it out to more states and getting them involved. We did 6 last year.
Okay.
And they had 3 in August.
Right.
That involved every state.
So this is national homeland security.
Yes.
This
The
isn't the
tabletop,
state.
right, the federal DHS is having a national tabletop where election directors and staff from every state can participate, and it's 3 days. This year they asked that you participate in 8A, so you can present, 5 states will be presenting best practices, so we asked if we can be a presenter, just to go through some of the initiatives that have been implemented by IT and election ops.
But like for the e-poll books, the state DHS participated in our testing of those, so we continue to partner with them on a lot of things.
Yeah, I understand.
And what was the other thing I was going to say? Well, state continues to help us when we find out about county incidents. They're part of the reporting procedures there. The risk assessment we're doing. That's on his thing. So
On the time excuse for voting, can you tell when you get the calls whether you're getting from individuals or you're getting from business people?
both
Both.
unions, business people, and individuals.
You got any ballpark percentages?
Most are,
Even?
I would say probably half business, about 25% union, 25% individuals.
all the same question, though, basically.
Right.
And what's the question?
The question is, you've extended the time for them to vote from 2 hours to 3 hours. You've taken away some of the requirements surrounding that time, and you've expanded voting days to 10. Why?
That's why I asked.
I mean, they're like, we could understand if it was still 1 day,
I gotcha.
you could extend the time, but now there's 10 days,
So it's
including
3, so let me
weekends,
make sure I
nights.
understand. It's 3 hours on election day you can get for employees to go vote.
Right.
And there's no, I mean, it used to be that
The
if you
front
didn't have
and the
adequate
end,
time
yeah.
front and end, that's
That's
eliminated.
gone.
Yeah, and
I
I
see.
think we have 9 election days
Yeah.
now. So
You could pick
don't
any one
you
of
get-
those
well,
days.
Actually,
well,
10.
Can't you pick each one of the 10?
You could,
No.
theoretically,
Well, it says
Applies
to
to
allow
voting
time to
89
vote.
We've
Well, if
at
you
least
go and there's a
opined that
line-
it's only election.
no, if you go and there's a line, and you come back and say you didn't vote,
It really is.
Oh, you can
Because-
go again.
I mean, we
They're
don't
asking,
know.
can I
That's what
use-
we're trying
can
to
I
figure out.
Use paid time off that they already have, you know.
I see.
Does,
Is it chargeable time?
right.
Under the state system
the
now,
basic
because
question
it's
is,
there under
shouldn't
our
we-
payroll.
Shouldn't
It
we
does, it's a
draft,
jury time.
shouldn't we try to draft a revision to this?
To
the law itself,
Yeah.
What?
In 5 days?
No, no, no. I'm
Um,
talking about for
I
our
think the current one was
2020
done in less time,
legislative
but-
project.
Well,
Right.
we've at least articulated, this is a,
Yeah, I mean, we told the governor and the legislature that we didn't think that
just repeal
that
it.
was a good idea. Well, so why
Use
don't,
the old one.
why don't we discuss it? I'm just putting it on the to-do list for the 2020 legislative agenda, that we take a
There we
position
go.
on this, because
Are you talking 30 hours on 10, I mean, possibility of 30 hours?
For every election.
No,
60.
60,
60 plus election day, 15.
Yeah.
75.
75 hours.
Because we made it uniform now next year for primary.
I see.
No, but that's just one election.
I'm just saying, we have 75 hours at a minimum for every election beginning in January
Yeah.
2020.
so let's go on record.
Well, it sounds like
And to
something
try
should
to-
be done. I don't know what it is.
I mean, the Department of Labor keeps calling. They don't know what to do
On
with
how to
it.
interpret it?
Yeah,
or-
they have no idea what to do with it.
Well, have you and Brian talked about a potential opinion?
I
Well,
think we
we
talked about trying to
talked-
talk to labor.
We've talked about the issue.
We have talked about the issue, and part of the interesting thing about this provision is that there are a few aspects of the questions that come to us that are answerable in the language of the statute, but a lot of it has to do with labor law considerations and how a court would actually interpret the provisions. Because there are many, many things that the statute leaves wholly unanswered in terms of how it would actually be applied, and so obviously there are a lot of questions out there. So the easy questions have been easy to answer. The harder questions, it's never a satisfying thing when someone calls an attorney and their answer is, well, we just don't know. But sometimes that's the truth, and the statute leaves a number of relevant questions unanswered. So we try to be as truthful as we can be with people, and we're working on FAQs.
But generally, some of them were there before anyway. The labor law issues were there before.
They were easier to explain.
But
same issues.
But they didn't come to us as much.
Because no one used the provision.
Not many people. Now I think they're assuming more people will use it, more people are asking the question, and even the Labor Department was sending the questions to us. And we're like, well, I don't know how to answer that. It's a labor issue. It's not an election law issue. Why don't you answer it?
It's no more clearly
it's no more clearly answerable by us as
for
by
example,
them.
my brother owns a fence company, and he has probably 80 seasonal employees, and some are on prevailing wage jobs. And if this person takes time off during any one of these days, does he have to pay the prevailing wage? Does he have to pay the regular wage? I said, I don't know. And he said, well,
I don't know how I would ever answer that.
That's why I asked.
I don't know that that's an
Yeah.
election per se, other than I know the state system that I put my time into and everybody in the agency does. They already had it in there in case people did it under the old provision of law, and it's treated kind of like a jury. You just get the time and subtract the time, and that's a paycheck. That's easy to say if you're in the state system. I don't know what that does if you're in a county system, school bus operator, or anybody else.
So, I mean, do you think we could write something in the context of the statute to address it, or do you think the statute needs a change in order to really deal with the problems you're encountering with this?
Well, I think the FAQ, we could do our best bet, and it might not answer all the questions, and that would help to get something out. I don't think it's gonna answer all the questions, but we ought to put the ones we can answer in there also. Otherwise, they're gonna still bother others to answer it. And then, but I think ideally, we might have to address a change to the wording.
I think that, next year's legislative package, if we come up with
No, I
something.
agree. I think we should look at it,
Yeah,
absolutely.
it's almost worthy of a standalone send-over.
Yeah, maybe we should highlight it, though, to make it a priority. Some way, if that's.
Might have passed all the ones we've had on our list this year by the time we get done.
Conceptually, it's a good idea, you don't wanna throw the
Okay.
baby
No, I
out with the
don't disagree.
bathwater.
Right. Yep. We could do that.
All right, so we'll move to information technology. William
I'm sorry,
Collins.
I have to leave you. I just wanted to say thank you so much for letting us speak today. I really appreciate it. And we're meeting with legislators right now. We're gonna meet with Levine, who's the head of the election committee, so if we can mention to him that you have something going on over here, we can plant a seed in his ear. It sounds like you are just a little bit frustrated with how much time people are allowed off at this point because of the early voting. Have I got?
Well, we know how to talk to him ourselves.
I know, but
The legislature's well aware of it.
Oh, okay. I was
watch
gonna
the video.
follow up with just two small points. I know that you're looking at the poll book vendors, and I hope that you're aware that NTS is a partner with BR Systems. BR Systems is a company that has been hacked already in 2 separate states, and I think it's something that is very problematic. They have very serious security issues, and so I just wanted to make you aware of that. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right. Good afternoon, Commissioners. I'll start with the projects. Capus Vitus. Development continues on the project, obviously, with recent activity continue to be focused on the EFX, or electronic filing system, testing and report development. Work is also going well on the new secure application portal. That's for the login and authentication and the security around that for multi-factor authentication. We held a demonstration of the public reporting functionality similar to what we provided you with in late March. We provided to some external groups on May 29th. answered several questions regarding functionality, and then we also received some feedback on potential future enhancements. In terms of project schedule, we're still having some challenges with the data conversion efforts, bringing over historical data into the new system so it can be utilized, together.
Sorry, Bill, which system are you talking about?
With the Campus FIDUS.
Yeah, this is Campus
It's
FIDUS.
all Campus FIDUS stuff.
Some of the old Oracle data conversion.
Right, so
You probably typed that by now.
Yeah, so bringing over the historical data is always a challenge in any project for data conversion. Not only you're addressing bad data that may be collected over years with holes in data or things like that, but also now you're trying to move it and massage it into a new format for new functionality, relationships between data change, things like that. There's a whole, you're trying to map it from one structure to another. We're still having some challenges with it, but we're making good progress. That said, we're still on target for a soft launch with the beta group in July. And we've been working with the trainers to prepare our first training session for that group, and we'll probably hold that at the end of this month for them.
Well, what does a soft launch mean?
So soft launch is, we've identified not a full rollout, but to work with a set beta group that will file through the traditional filing as well as the new system, so we can compare the results and make sure they're accurate.
You have certain filers that are part of this group that are going to do that for us?
Right. We've had a group all along, and then we are now honing that down to a subset of that group that will work with us to provide feedback, understanding that there may be some pain points in the process, but to file in parallel so we have those two results to compare and assure the accuracy of the data before we do a full rollout. Nice voter. I'm also happy to report that with the completion of the disaster recovery testing and some follow-up mitigation, we had a couple issues that we needed to address from our main weekend of disaster recovery. Those have now been mitigated, and essentially that Nice Voter project, refresh project is complete. We're just assembling now the final deliverables for sign-off, and that will probably be next week. I'm just happy to report that because that was in progress when I started, and so it's nice to come to fruition. We still, behind that, still have a long list of improvements to make as you go through any project that list builds. Also with Nice Voter, we're currently working with vendors, the county vendors, to evaluate system changes needed in Nice Voter, in particular around voter history as related to early voting. So when and how a voter voted on actual election day or voted early, if it was in person or affidavit. We need to collect information from their systems on that, and so we need changes on both our system and theirs. We've outlined some options of how that could occur using the existing data transfer that we use, and we're discussing with them what those options are and then how quickly we can get them implemented. The redevelopment of the MOVE application is also continues in progress. We are currently on schedule for that. We did hold an internal demo for that system within the last month. IT continues to work with executive and several other units on issues of budgeting issues and impacts of the new legislation. As Bob said, we've given estimates as things come along, our best estimates based on whatever information we have. E-poll books, again, we were also participating in efforts there for approvals, and then as well with the OGS group for acquisition on those. Accessibility, IT's continue to work with mainly our WAC, our accessibility coordinator, and meeting the requirements of the new settlement. We've had several meetings with the new vendor, and are preparing to have them kick off our first audit scans under the settlement of the website. And we're also adding additional contractor assistance to help with not only some of the Nice Voter changes, but also some of the changes that need to be made to voter election night reporting to accommodate accessibility issues with those two systems by December. For security, the Secure Elections Group, our county board efforts are still very much underway. The on-site visits, I think as I reported last month, for all the county boards, the 58 visits have been completed, and we're starting to review receive and review all the draft reports. The first one, which was really a pilot, scary, that's been reviewed and approved. That will go out to the county very soon. The others are currently under review, and they will most likely start releasing within the next week or so for those. Installation of intrusion detection systems have been completed for most counties across the state. There were several counties that did not participate in our offering. We received from 2 of those counties just documentation that they have existing capabilities. They did not need ours. We're still talking to a couple others to try to fill the gaps of whether they actually have something existing, or we need to determine what next steps are. But it's down to that's 2 or 3 counties there. The other offering we have is managed security services. The pilot is still rolling out for that. The remaining counties for the pilot are expected to be completed by tomorrow, and we'll follow up those pilot counties in terms of a short survey like we did with the IDS offering to get some feedback before we roll out for the rest of the counties. And I think I partially reported last month that we rolled out the cybersecurity training. Those notices have all gone out for county board staff, as well as their IT staff that support county boards, and as well as the staff here for the new curriculum for 2019 for cybersecurity training. We're also continuing our outreach efforts on multiple fronts on security efforts. Jeff Baez, our Chief Information Security Officer, along with Tom Connolly and myself, presented at NYSBOE Spring Conference. That's the New York State Local Government IT Directors Association. It's a mouthful. Their spring conference, and we provided an update on a lot of the initiatives we're doing for the counties and where they're at, as well as some things we're looking at doing for future, and solicit some feedback there. They were also very interested in what was going on with e-poll books and things along those lines of technology. We had a separate meeting with the EISAC, or the Elections Infrastructure Sharing Information Analysis Center. Along the same lines, an update on our current initiatives, and then what we're looking for in the future, and how we can maybe potential collaboration with them. Jeff has also attended the multi-state ISAC Information Sharing Analysis Center. They had an annual meeting in Denver. He attended that and participated on a panel discussing a lot of the efforts that we've taken in New York State, and provided some feedback on that in other states. That conference is highly attended by other states and local governments who are looking to do some of the same kind of things, particularly with some of the HAVA funding that they have as well. We also continue work with the Center for Technology and Government on the project for NICE voter data. That's the project to detect anomalies. Yeah, from data. My spell check is wrong. And data coming from the county boards to detect abnormal volumes in data, or transactions coming from them, or changes or in key fields that we've defined. It's still very early in that, but we are progressing, and they provided our last meeting provided a demo of their initial analysis of that data and what it was starting to look like to them, and as well as we provided some clarification to them on that. And as always, we are continuing to work on multiple security fronts here for our own improvements to our infrastructure, as well as prepare for our federal DHS risk assessment scheduled for late July. In terms of the website, traffic looks about normal for this time of year, about approximately 250,000 views per month, both over April and May. so pretty much in line with normal expectations.
Bill, what's a view in your world? What does that mean?
A view, so usually, every time someone views a page, so if
I
they
go on to the campaign finance web portion of our website and I call up a committee, that's a view.
essentially,
And then if
so,
I look at individual pages, each page is a view?
correct,
Okay.
correct.
Now, those views are multiple, he made 3 views in that particular.
Correct. So we actually track 2 things. We track sessions and we track views. So a session, you would be a single session. You come to the site, view multiple pages.
How many sessions were there last one?
For May, there was approximately almost 78,000 sessions.
So of those 78,000,
there was
they did 240,000 individual.
260,000
260,
individual
I got
pages.
you. I got you.
Are those unique views?
They were, yes, I believe those are considered unique views.
I have another question. I got this report from the Enforcement Council, and I maybe it came up at another time, but it addresses a dysfunction between FIDUS, between New York City and State Board. It just says that.
Campaign Finance Board, you mean?
No, it says here, another reason for errors in the SBOE balances, talking about the balances that you quoted last meeting, is apparent flawed communications between New York City filing system and SBOE's filing system in transmitting reports filed at New York City and state. It is well known that such a flaw falsely caused the appearance of negative balances and other balances issued for New York City filers, where none existed. In addition, certain reports filed with New York City are not transmitted to SBOE, thereby causing the SBOE balance to reflect as inaccurate. Does that make any sense to you?
That is a better question for us.
Well, I talked to him because I thought it was, okay, I'll wait till you talk.
All right, okay. I mean, if you'd like, we can address that question now.
Why don't you address it?
Okay. So the New York City with the Campaign Finance Board has obviously its own system pursuant to local law/city charter requiring financial disclosure statements to be filed with them. And very early on in the process, the State Board of Elections recognized that with those city filers having a filing obligation in New York City and also having a filing requirement with us, that there's a duplicativeness to that. Many CFB filers use vendors that provide them with a bridge so that they, the filers, can essentially file with CFB, and the same data set then ends up finding its way to us via any one of a number of intermediary vendors. We have attempted to maintain a communication with CFB, and they have attempted to maintain a communication with us so that when they change their system or we change our system, people are kept in the loop to see to it that that data movement is accurate. But the fundamental obligation on the part of the filer is that they have to make sure that their stuff is accurate in both places. For the most part, it is. But occasionally there are some hiccups, and we do resolve them as best we can and alert people to what the issues are. But I think actually in the report, what really is being discussed is the fact that after the CFB does an audit and certain numbers and figures are adjusted, those audited tallies do not end up automatically finding their way into the state system. If the filer does not send the information to us, just like any other filer that would have information and say their Lotus Notes, whatever, doesn't send it to us, we don't know it, and the system doesn't necessarily reflect the same balance. So it is not surprising that there would be times when, either because of, in very few instances, a glitch, more often information not being sent to us that was sent to the CFB, that the numbers would not necessarily be the same. Now, a final note on that, there is legislation, I believe, that has passed both houses that would allow, and we have suggested
which
this,
would make this moot.
which will moot this.
Right.
Yes.
Okay.
So this is something
I just
we are
wanted to know
on, and
what
we're on the
this-
cusp of a permanent solution to it.
Yeah, great. Okay, you know, she's not here right now.
No.
Can I keep asking him some questions?
Well, I was actually going,
Absolutely.
go ahead.
Well,
For Mike, yes.
Is Bill done?
is Bill done, then it's that
Yeah.
unit anyway.
He can take a breath.
All right.
No, I thought you were done.
Okay.
All right, so it is time for the Enforcement Council's report. The Enforcement Council, again, is not with us. There appears to have been very little activity on the part of Enforcement Council in the sense that there were no new hearing proceedings, which has been the case for the entire year, that there are no new subpoena proposals, again, which is the case for the entire year, that there are no referrals for criminal prosecution, which is also the case for the whole year. But the day before yesterday at 5 o'clock, I received an email with a report on the July 2018 non-filers report. And it contained some interesting proposals. And perhaps that's what you were leading
I
to,
was very
Commissioner.
confused when I got it. I read it through, and first of all, you know, check me if I'm wrong. 4 years this has gone on? For 4 years, we've been asking for things, and we've never gotten them. And all of a sudden, I get this relatively, I think, comprehensive report on numbers and so on and so
I
forth.
wouldn't call it comprehensive.
Well, I want to
It
be
leaves on a
fair.
lot.
I want to be fair. Okay,
It's long.
what assuming
long
was
is
a
it
comprehensive report before I ask him questions, all right? And that it seems to me that, let's assume this was comprehensive, which would have been helpful, and we had gotten it 3.5 years ago, we would have started a discussion on how to fix some of these things. So we never got that opportunity because we never got, and I'm really ticked off at this, we never got this kind of data where we could have said, well, that's not accurate, and then agree on something, and then add and things like that, and come to some solutions to how to fix any of the problems that we had. So that's the first part. Then I was confused about, you know, these numbers, and since that's moved now, that's fine. But I want to know why we're getting it now. And it's related to, as it says in here, it's related to the things that we asked the staff to do. What, 2 meetings ago, was it, we asked you to do?
No, it was December.
In December, okay. I also think that this required a little research on her part. Okay, and the research took 4 weeks.
No, it
Considerably
took
longer.
6 months.
6
So we-
months.
yeah.
Okay, so that's
Yes.
enough time. So she had her staff get enough time to do this. If you were doing this, how many staff and what time would it take?
I don't know, but
Not 6 months.
it's a great question. I don't have a good answer.
And the other thing is that why, all the recommendations here seem that you're supposed to do everything.
I did notice that.
That was what also bothered me because, you know, I'm not a lawyer, I don't read all the election laws, I depend on you guys who are lawyers. And it seems to me that she was given the responsibility to deal with these non-filers, correct?
Yes.
Okay? And you, when you have non-filers, you give them to her, right?
Yes.
Why do you have to, why can a recommendation that you have to do all this pre-research before you give it to her?
Well, there does appear to be a substantial shifting of the responsibilities that does not comport with what the legislature had intended. And actually, one of the serious issues that I think this calls into focus is one that the commissioners attempted to address in the enforcement regulations, which was to direct the Enforcement Council to send these so-called 5-day letters when a report is 10 days late, which directs the filer to file the report within 5 days, and a failure to do so is prima facie evidence of a willful failure to make the filing. And then at that point in time, that letter includes a statement historically that says that if you don't comply, we're going to proceed with enforcement against you. So the 2018 January periodic started with 2,500, maybe it was 2,501 reports not filed. We're still at, 84% of them are not, have not been filed. And part of what the Enforcement Council seems to be saying in this communication is there are a lot of deadwood committees overall on the list. And while and we're going to study her words very carefully. We're going to take, any recommendations that she has in here very seriously. We've scheduled a staff meeting for next week to talk about it. But the reality ultimately is that here's what we know. We know that even if we credit her finding that there are 1,200 committees out of the 8,000 that file with us who are deadwood, people who've taken on responsibility, but then walked away from it. Even if we credit that, it means that there are hundreds, including who's actually already filed, roughly 900 committees that by her own research, she has no indication that they're not active, but we know for certain that they have not filed, and nothing has been done with respect to those hundreds.
Yeah, I know
and in reality, I think it's thousands. I don't think her analysis is accurate. But even crediting her analysis at 100% accuracy, that is where we're at. And when we look backwards at the old system and what happened when we actually sent the 5-day letter, which is an enforcement device provided for in the statute, section 14-108, subdivision 5, if she's listening. What we saw was in for example, with the January 2011 periodic, we sent out 2,070 5-day letters that said, you are late, this is a willful file, do it, or we're coming after you. Between then and when we actually commenced an order to show cause, we went from 2,079 filers to 536. And people who are included in that number would be committees who did need to close down because they had stopped doing something. And this rattled their cage. This got them to clean up their stuff, file, shut down, and do the stuff they needed to do. It brought them to us in a way that sending out emails and other things that we've done and things that she's talked about have not accomplished. This is what the legislature intended. This is the process that was followed, and it worked. And then from the 536 order to show cause named defendants, by the time we got to judgment, we were down to 314, and our crack staff and compliance points out that's 85% compliance. It is the direct reverse of what we have now. And looking at it in the aggregate, from January 2011 through January of 2014, we had sent out 14,577 5-day letters, and of that number, ultimately we only had to obtain 1,794 judgments, indicating that the 5-day letter alone over that period of time yielded approximately an 88% rate of disclosure. And if we look at the other individual periodic reports during the time frame, we would see that pattern held up over time, and that the problem began when all routine enforcement of campaign finance filings ended. And perversely, when people committees have learned that nothing happens if they don't file, if nothing happens if they don't go through the trouble to shut down, they have stopped doing it. The message that we have sent is, you do not have to file, and if you don't, nothing is going to happen to you. And that is not a message that the compliance unit is capable of negativing. The only person in this agency that has the power to do that is the Chief Enforcement Counsel, and she has declined to do so. So for the July 14 periodic, the old enforcement paradigm was in place, we ended up with 282 non-filers ultimately not coming into compliance. And as we look through the periodics from 2014, again, this data is slightly stale, so March of last year, but by the time we get to the January periodic, we go from 282 to 2,530. There is no routine enforcement of campaign finance disclosure that's occurring, and the result is people are not filing. And the commissioners have said this until they are blue in the face, and no one seems to care or be listening. Now, that said, she has given us a report. It is thoughtful in many respects. There are things we can learn from it. And I think there are some changes that we might be able to implement, and we will read it with that in mind and be responsible public servants and moving forward.
But just to follow up with that, we will read it and make mine. We used to meet with her. I don't think there's one recommendation she made to the compliance unit that we didn't implement to make it a more seamless process. Right?
You've asked for it.
Brian?
I think that's true. I think that's true. And
I've been less vocal than some of the people on this committee about this particular issue. And, you know, I think we all want to make, develop a system that actually works. I don't care who does it. And this would be a good start if it was given to us, a long time ago. I just find it strange. And without any comment, her appointment's up this year. And I think that this ought to be accurate, if it's not accurate.
I'm a sun always rises in the east tomorrow morning, no matter what happened yesterday. I'm happy to take what we just got and look prospectively. Not saying I'm satisfied, but it's like I'd rather look at it for what value it is as opposed to
I agree. I think that could be very helpful. And I'm only interested, as the rest of the board, I'm sure, in getting a system in place that actually works and stops a lot of non-filers. This is the Giuliani syndrome, You got the window washers off the street, that helped. You get the little things done, and a lot of the major things stop.
Get something done.
Parking.
Well, yeah, and I frankly, I don't think it is a little thing. I think those who don't file at all are the most flagrant violators we have. I mean, if you file something and it's wrong, that's bad enough. But if you give us nothing, that to me is the most egregious
I don't disagree with you. I guess what I'm doing is, that's the impression I got from the Enforcement Council, that these are minor compared to the other business that she has.
I think you're right about that.
If I get the one of the things that that the Chief Enforcement Council mentions in her report is that we are not crediting enough the change in the statute that requires the hearing that requires the Chief Enforcement Council to present to the hearing officer evidence that the equitable determination is such that weighs in favor of being allowed to move forward with a court proceeding. Well, we have 24 hearing officer proceedings that have gone forward, and most of them, the overwhelming majority of them, have dealt with non-filings, obviously an exceptionally small percentage of the total universe of non-filers. But in each one of those, there's basically a cookie-cutter paragraph that's typically labeled Hearing Officer Equitable Determination under Election Law, Section 3-104, and it just says that words to this effect, almost a cookie cutter in all of them. The violations are clearly not de minimis, in that willful violations of this provision, i.e. the requirement to file, are punishable as a criminal misdemeanor. And B, voters and opposing candidates alike were repeatedly denied the ability to ascertain the manner and means by which the candidate campaign is being financed. And then number 2, the subject of the complaint have not in good faith corrected the violations and that they did not timely and properly complete the filings even after being contacted. That's the 5-day letter. We sent the letter. All of the showing for a hearing officer's equitable determination is made if we follow the statutory scheme. And we're being told that this is an impossibility and this is hard and this requires too much work. It's nonsense.
And the compliance unit is cheering for Brian.
Well, I just want to ask that question.
What's the big deal if you park your car in front of a fire hydrant?
Well, if there's a fire.
I think that was a rhetorical. I think that was a rhetorical question.
To ticket those cars?
Well, if there's a fire, the fire department will make it work.
All right.
Oh, we're not even done.
All right. So does Enforcement Council have anything else to add? All right. I don't think we have any old business.
Right.
So we'll move to approval of electronic poll book system vendors. There is a proposed resolution.
Number 16.
I know it's been a long meeting, but would Tom or Brendan just run through just what you've done in terms of determining that these 3 vendors should be approved and that, and why 2 vendors are pending further review?
Sure. So as I had mentioned earlier in past meetings, what we had done was come up with a number of minimum security and functional requirements that any electronic poll book system would have to meet in order to be used in the state. All in all, it's probably around 150 different requirements that we came up with. We provided all those requirements in as far as an application packet that went on our website. We invited vendors to submit.
Could I just say, and we assembled those requirements based on reviewing other states that have implemented early voting, for the most part, right?
From a security standpoint, yes. I mean, obviously some of the functional requirements were just things that what the normal poll book would happen that came out of law. But the security requirements, we spent a good amount of time researching what every other state that may have had some sort of approval or evaluation process, and we looked at all of their requirements and we tried to figure out what made sense for us. A lot of it we found to be duplicative, so it looked like other people were copying as well. Some were very stringent, some were very not. I think that we ended up on the more stringent end of states as far as everything goes. And so we had basically put out, this is what we were going to be testing any system against. We invited vendors to submit their systems. We did get 5. We gave them a couple of weeks to provide us with documentation as to a number of different requirements that we thought documentation would suffice. We reviewed all of the documentation that was provided to us to determine whether or not their system complied or demonstrated compliance with a specific requirement. If there was uncertainty, we went back to them and we said, we don't know where you're pointing to, please be very specific, or please just copy and paste the language from your documentation and show us exactly how you're complying with that, which they did. We also had them come in. We also had the systems in place. We, like I had mentioned, we partner with DISHES, the state DHS, and also NYSBOE to do vulnerability scanning on the hardware. We set up each system. We ran a number of different tools and testing protocols through them to ensure that, to kind of just to determine if there were any vulnerabilities that might need to be addressed, to make sure that information that was being shared back and forth between devices was being protected and through encryption, through any kind of back-end system that may have exist as a component as part of the overall system, was also scanned for vulnerabilities. We, as I mentioned, had the in-person demonstrations with each vendor. So we kind of went through their system. We went through a whole script of anywhere from importing the data from the County Board of Elections perspective to setting up on the morning of Election Day to checking in voters to a number of different scenarios that addressed some of the functions, but also some usability issues. We, all the way to getting the information back into the overall system from Election Day or from early voting, to be able to then export voter history that could be imported into existing voter registration systems, as well as any other functionality that they may have had. After that, we also then had a number of additional follow-up calls or meetings or WebExes with some of the vendors as far as whatever came out of the in-person demos. We discussed anything that we thought was still outstanding or issues that we thought still required some additional demonstration. And out of that, we've now come up with a list of 3 vendors who we think have successfully shown compliance with all of the mandatory requirements. As for the other vendors that are not on the list of the original 5, we are continuing to work with them to try to see if what they've submitted to us already is sufficient to demonstrate compliance, or if additional documentation is necessary, or additional testing. Some of the deficiencies that we found in some of those systems would require code change to their software. So obviously that's something that takes some time. And then also we need to kind of not just look at something and say like, well, looks like you fixed it, because we also need to kind of take a little bit of a deeper dive when it comes to the technology of it. If source code changes are being made, we have to make sure that this doesn't create any additional security issues, because we need to know how that was made. So we sent out letters to the two vendors that we're going to continue to work with last night, that provided basically just a list of all the requirements that we still have issues with as far as that we're outstanding with them. We have scheduled 2-hour WebEx conference calls with them tomorrow, both of them, along with NYSTEC, to sit in so that we can kind of discuss and make it abundantly clear what our questions are. And we're leveraging NYSTEC to make sure that whatever artifacts or whatever testing we might need to do to show compliance with whatever information they give us is the right way to go about it. I don't know exactly what's going to take on their end, because obviously, like I said, there may be some code changes on their end, and I didn't write their system, so they're going to have to tell us that, and hopefully they'll be able to tell us that tomorrow. And we'll continue to do so with this initial round. So at this point, we have the 3 that we have in the resolution, and that's what's before you.
Tom, there's no national testing process for poll books like there is for voting machines?
No, the EAC does have a number of other states' requirements on their website, but there is no national standard for testing electronic poll books.
So it's not the same process that we would use for a voting machine that you go through for certification of a... I mean, is this a certification that we're offering to these people? What's the actual...
No, it's an approval, but as I said before, in reviewing all of, well, not every state obviously has an approval process or even some sort of testing process that we could see. I think it was less than 10 that actually had something formal when we were going through to try to determine what we thought was best for our set of requirements. And as I said, it went for anywhere from being extremely stringent to pretty easy to get through. And I think that we end up on the spectrum as certainly being one of the more stringent states as far as our requirements.
Because, for my purposes, I think, the security issue, which is paramount in many ways, the voting machines, I think, have fewer security aspects. I think these, have more potentially, because you are going to hook to the internet potentially at some point, which I think does create more security issues vis-a-vis these systems than our voting machines. And I just want to be sure that we are testing to a level that we feel confident that those issues have been dealt with, so we don't have that kind of a security problem down the road. Because I think what I've seen in the literature is that's where the hacking efforts have been directed in other states, is more to their voter registration systems and these systems, not really to the voting machines themselves. So I think that's of interest here as well.
So to that end, I mean, one of the mandatory requirements for these e-poll book systems is that they cannot be connected to any other election system. So there's never going to be a situation where they are live connected to a voter registration database back at the county. The information has to come out and has to be separately then introduced into the electronic poll book system. The approach that we took with our requirements was obviously knowing that these devices would likely be connected, especially during the early voting period, and sharing amongst other electronic poll books throughout the county to ensure that double voting wasn't going on. I think and we do have a requirement to certify that the networks that will be used with electronic poll book systems comply with our requirements as well. Obviously, that's where Todd mentioned before about us having to go out in the field a little bit more, because a single configuration with a couple of different devices, in a room downstairs that we were using to really look at it, is much different from a county that might have, half a dozen early voting locations with multiple poll sites that are all communicating with each other on the internet. We certainly created requirements that would help to kind of lock down the network to make the network as secure as possible, whether counties decide to use existing connectivity, or Wi-Fi devices, or mobile, like MiFi devices, mobile hotspots, and there are ways of going about that. But we took the approach that we wanted to make sure that the information outside of the tubes that they travel through is as protected as possible. So that's why I think a lot of our requirements on the security side for the devices themselves, the hardware components, and how they treat the data and how they protect the data, are certainly very robust. So we certainly kept that in mind as far as the different ways in which these could be implemented, but the importance of making sure that the integrity of that information is maintained.
And sufficiently tough that 2 of the vendors so far have not been able to get over the hurdle.
That is the case right now. I mean,
Right.
So, and we'll discuss that with them tomorrow.
Okay.
So the next step is if we approve these today, the counties would be authorized to purchase these machines, these e-poll books for use this fall.
Yes.
And these would also be put on a state contract at some point to allow the counties that want to buy off the state contract.
Right, and our, at this point, this is just the 3 that we're ready to recommend for approval right now.
Okay.
There could be more.
Okay, so I'm ready to vote on the resolution.
Yeah, I'm ready.
All right, so those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you.
It might be helpful if you just say the name of the 3 approved for the counties listening, so that they can continue their process. I don't know.
Okay, yeah, if they don't have the resolution in front of them.
That's fine.
which is-
I mean, we were going to be sending out a notification to the counties later
so
today to
they're
let
all
them
watching.
know.
Yeah.
But right now, the 3 that are in the resolution for approval are No Inc., Robus, and 10X.
And the 2 that are on hold are NTS.
NTS and Demtech are the 2 vendors that we're talking with tomorrow to continue looking at.
Do you expect any other vendors to approach us, or do you think this is the universe, these 5?
We've gotten a couple of calls from possibly other vendors about, hey, is it too late to get in, or just questions about our requirements. So do I think that at some point we may receive another application? Because we told them they're free to submit an application, but that our May 3rd deadline was for this kind of initial round that we were focusing on, and that anything that came in after May 3rd was going to be dealt with on a rolling basis. But as of today, we have not received any additional applications.
And I guess we should give the operations unit also a little credit for, the statute was passed as part of the budget. And
April 12th.
so, so they've turned this around in less than 2 months, and it's an extraordinary amount of work. For the public or the counties who are interested, there are pretty thorough evaluation reports that I guess you're going to post.
Yes, we have the PIO has the public version.
And I, for one, notwithstanding my views on transparency, I agree that it's not a good idea to give a roadmap to the security issues that were analyzed, and that the security portion should be kept. The overview is still there that includes the summary of the security reports, but the details of I
Yes,
think
we've
are
omitted-
appropriately kept
Right,
confidential.
some of the configuration details that
Right.
aren't really necessary.
Okay. So the next resolution is for the adoption of Part 6217.7, and it's 1914, is it? Not
19-13 is next.
Okay, 13. All right. Is there any discussion on this?
Just so I understand, so this is final adoption of our transfer process in the state, the statewide transfer process. We've already put these out, and this will be final adoption now. Okay.
And I guess we could do 14 at the same time, which is also,
Pre-registration?
well, all right, let's just, 19-13 is the resolution to amend Part 6217.7.
So moved.
Second.
Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All right, it's unanimously adopted. All right, the next resolution is 19-14, which is for the permanent adoption of the resolution implementing the change of voter registration or pre-registration of persons who are 16 years of old. All right, is there?
So moved.
All right,
Second.
Those in favor say aye.
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 And that's unanimously adopted. And then Resolution 19-15 is the formal authorization of $50,000 from the HAVA funds for costs associated with Microsoft Premier Support Agreement. Is there a second?
Second.
Those in favor say aye.
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 And that is unanimously adopted. I don't believe there's a need for executive session. Is there any reason to discuss now our next meeting, or that's really gonna be based on when vendors are ready for?
We'll know more tomorrow. We're thinking as an estimate, right after the June 25th primary, as an estimate.
You're
For
talking the
a
end of
meeting to
February.
deal with the two outstanding vendors. That could be a web meeting, if you so desired.
But you're talking that week of the 24th, you think?
Yeah,
would be?
27th.
27th, 28th? Okay.
So there is a realistic possibility that these other two vendors of e-poll books will pass muster.
I know they're eagerly working on the list that was sent to them, and so I anticipate, yes, we will have them. I just can't give you I don't wanna pick a date, so.
Is that the only issue that we'd have to deal with at that time frame?
Yes.
We have nothing
So
else
we could
pending?
do it online.
We could do it, yeah, okay.
And we have no ballot access deadline driving a calendar for your next meeting. So it's whatever you.
Okay. Do you wanna set something
want
Yeah,
for later? Or do you
a
wanna
real
wait?
meeting
I've got
and then have
some
a web
issues in
meeting.
July, so,
Yeah, well,
just
so
so
do
you
I.
know.
so-
July is gonna be a little, but I'm willing to talk about it if you want to now. Or do you wanna
I'm
wait till-
flexible,
I
but
know,
maybe
but
we
I'd
should
like-
just
I'd like
wait.
to-
Do you wanna wait?
To sort of get a ballpark like we did, pencil it in and so we know what we might be doing.
All right, so we're thinking July 27th is or June 27th is a very real possibility
Yes.
For a web meeting.
for a web meeting.
I'm
Then
just talking
following,
about Commissioner Peterson here while I'm watching.
okay, fair enough.
Confused.
Yeah, I could meet late July.
Well, I guess that's when we should schedule it,
I
it's
could-
the
I
end of
could-
July.
I could do like end of July if that's something like that last week.
The 23rd, 24th, 25th.
Well, later, a little, like
I'm
later in
told-
that week, early the next week.
I'm told
We could
from
do.
the
July
council
30th?
in Normandy today that,
We doing a web on the 27th?
June would probably be web because it'd be a single issue meeting, I think,
Okay.
okay?
Bill McCann told me to pencil in the 24th to the 26th. The council will be in New York City, and we would have to be available by phone for one of the court cases.
We don't know the exact date yet.
The who would be?
Which month is this?
There may be.
What are you talking about?
July.
Yeah, there's
Some
there
court
may be-
case that
in July,
they've
the common
scheduled
clause
already
case.
for the lawyers to
Oh,
be in
the
New York
common
City.
clause case, okay.
Right. So
So 29th or 30th? Or 31st?
that
I will
would,
be, I'll be away that week.
Okay, so that's bad for Greg.
so either the 22nd, 23rd would be, we're not,
I can't do
Peter's
that.
gone.
Oh, sorry,
I
sorry.
can't do that. But again, if we can't accommodate,
August 1st, first week of August.
19th that week, or is that?
19th?
so bad?
no, I can't do that.
Okay, well, August.
August I can do.
Fine with me.
I got something, you gotta pick a date at, let me see,
First week in August.
first week?
First,
I'm gonna be out from the 29th, the last week of July, and the first week of August.
Okay, what about the second week in
Well,
August?
then why don't we go with Thursday, July 25th?
Okay.
Let me just check.
And if Brian and Kim can't be there, it's not the end of the world.
yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
25th,
So
okay with me.
we'll put that in for now. 25th of July,
Thank you.
okay.
Tom and Brenda will run the meeting. But that's good, I am up for that.
We can mediate.
So we're gonna.
So we'll wait to hear from you on the June meeting, whether those systems come in for,
I think if we tentatively plan it for that day so that we can focus, and then we will cancel it. It's easier to cancel than to firm
All
up.
right, so it's tentatively scheduled for that day.
Right.
Okay.
That's good.
If for some
And
reason,
we're gonna get the agenda 2 weeks in advance.
well, we knew this was not on the agenda long in advance, that we told people that.
Are we done?
No,
All right.
they're actually better coming
Commit-
in a
commit
meeting
to
like this
adjourn.
than the day we're gonna vote.
What is it, Jarrett?
Sorry. I'm just wondering, is there someone in your office that I can liaise with who might be in charge of like doing any education or, and also, can I attend one of these trainings just to make sure? Meaning regarding early voting. And is there any educational outreach by the state plan, or is that left to counties? I just want a sense of like who I should communicate with.
John or
What's
Cheryl?
coming down the pipe, just so I'm putting out good information.
Oh, Greg's gone. Okay,
All
that's
right.
okay.
Well-
We're done.
Okay.
All right, so we agree to adjourn?
Yeah.
Yes,
And somebody should answer Jarrett's question.
yes, I don't have to.
Great.
John. Thank you.
Well, thank you.
These are just